application more into the monolithic direction than you intend. But if you do something like this where you share, one team maybe shares a couple of different modules, that's not going to be the end of the world, especially if they're always working on those two modules. All right, so to sum up a little bit, we talked about for lightweight applications that have a single team, a monolithic system might suit you better.
I don't understand why people do it. Git is invented, right? You don't need out-commented code. So delete all that stuff. Second step was we had a huge issue with the customers, these refactorings in a way that relies on the compiler, so that you know when you're in a green state and in a red state, because the compiler will tell you. That will be super powerful. Also because it is constantly there, right? It's not something we need to maintain over time. It's not like testing where we need to put some.
So, and that's actually quite normal, that we're not that rational. So it started more than 50 years of research into our errors of judgments, our cognitive biases as humans, and it led to the study of behavioral economics, and Kahneman and others actually also got a Nobel Prize for this work, and yeah, this very popular book. And this is a visual overview of cognitive biases that you can find on Wikipedia. This is not for you to read, this is just to show you the long list. So these are more than 200 reasons to question our own confidence. And they describe a lot of common behavioral patterns, many of them confirmed with repeated experiments and research that show that we are not the rational thinkers that we like to believe that we are, in case we want to change the database later. So it makes us feel good that we're controlling this one thing, but we might actually be endangering the overall delivery and business success. And our preference for what to spend time on and which risk to reduce is also affected by yet more biases. So the availability heuristic says that this is our tendency to think that the cognitive biases are actually also there for a reason, to keep us sane, right? So they help us in a lot of areas as well. It's just about the key, bringing some method to our instincts. Another thing is rubber ducking and pairing, because he always used to ask, like, but why are we doing that? How is that solving our problem? Why, why are we doing this again? And because I'm more like the person, but it is helpful to pick the situation when it's particularly important to be aware of them, when it's about something important, right? So, and that's usually the importance. And you could argue the way that we took the decision was good, but it just, there were just like unpredictable things that happened that in time, and that it gets reduced by emotional situations or things like making a first impression, right? Like when you introduce yourself to somebody, making that first impression reduces your mental budget, and then you often forget the name that they just told you, right? Yeah, but in terms of managing, yeah.
The system is telling you something. But at one point, Luca is able to come around and he reviews the change, asks for some, reviews the PR, asks for some changes, and sends back the PR to Emma. But Emma is busy with something else now. So she's working on ticket number 3. There are lots of other things going on, so she's not able to react immediately. And eventually she comes around and she incorporates the changes, and they go back and forth. And at one point, they converge, approve the pull request, and merge. So interesting thing to look at here is there are lots of things going on, but if you focus on ticket number 1, and we look at its lead time from start to finish, there's ticket number 1 is being actively worked on, which is called in lean processing or touch time, in a queue waiting for someone's attention. So, to provide a bit more of a context of the study that I did, I tend to advise and mentor and coach teams in a way that we try together to figure out
can depend on the wholly entities. So it's okay, not the other way around. I say no, but this is okay. But then if this mapping requires some external dependencies, or perhaps it's so complex, you can put it in a separate class. Now, extract when it grows. The first time we see this principle, when something grew big, extract it in a separate class. But then, surprise for some of you, I will write my entire logic for a use case in a facade. In a facade, all there. Okay, so the entire implementation in the facade. But then other use case will grow very big, right? And as they grow big, I will extract them to domain services and mind the colors. These are yellow, the color of joy, right?
A node you can think of as a black box, a unit of computation. And my node has kind of input and an output. We tend to think of ports. So some data comes in, the black box performs some magical transformation, and an output goes out. I push a kind of answer out onto the wire. Typically, what tends to happen is I create an instance of the node because there is some work available on the input systems, because effectively the idea is that this individual item can be simple and single-threaded. The multi-threading comes from running them all in parallel, and they just simply read work off the buffer. Typically, we can think about push or pull, sometimes hot or cold is another word for the same thing. Are we effectively observing something that is essentially spitting out data and we're just listening to it? A canonical example is usually a mouse moving around, generally lets you configure a consumer when it starts up to start receiving messages. And control packets, or brackets as they're sometimes called, this idea that I have a sequence of messages I want you to process, where I give you basically an initial control packet, sometimes called. So the idea that says I might need some data in order to do my work. That data could be generated by another node. It does, I don't know, some calculations on VAT or whatever, effectively, and gives you the final, and our service charges, it gives you the. So this is kind of the diagrammatic version, which is a little bit easier to read. By the means of being message driven, we obtain the properties of being resilient and elastic, which enables us to be responsive to users. That's effectively what they're driving.
And the reason why is pretty clear, isn't it? They can't put themselves in the mind of the user. Every user should think just like them, as far as they're concerned. So there are developers that can't design, but they're a very small minority. And I say this having trained literally thousands of developers over the last 15 years. So you've seen quite a number of failed design approaches, which I'm going to summarize here in just a moment. How much time do I have left? About 5-6 minutes. So I want to talk just a bit about the different levels of design effort, because some of the problems come up differently, and problems have more impact and more they lose you more money as you move up the scale. So certainly applying layout and graphic aesthetic design is more valuable, does increase the value over the no design situation. But that's by no means the only way that design can be enriched. You can also see going up to
in the chain that ends up with the domain logic and kind of acts as the orchestrator instead in this diagram. But generally all that happens is that orchestrator then just calls these services to get work done. And the problem with that is really all we've done is just wrap access to a database table in a REST API. And if our database actually exposes a REST API like DynamoDB or something like that, then what was the point? We really ended up with just a distributed monolith, right? We've made the situation worse in a way, because now we're just paying all this cost for effectively wrapping all these separate entities. But our workflow is still in one single centralized location and suffers from the problems that effectively we have multiple teams trying to adjust this single orchestration.
So we disproportionately consider past experience that was a bit more extreme, rather than looking at the actual case at hand.
Because then when somebody invents a blue color right below the red one, it's going to be very difficult for me to go back and add that and then check that I've remembered to put it in all the places, because I have no mechanism for knowing, right? Especially if you use default or something like that, it's terrible. Contrast that to the classes, where instead everything points toward, and you can be way more comfortable that you'll either have spotted it with your own eyes or the compiler will catch it, right? You can still have invariants, you can still have all these bad things, but the scope is a lot smaller than the entire code base. Now they're just this file at least. And then you can make more files, smaller packages, and then you can slowly isolate these out. And as I said, getting back to the story, we did actually make the happiest team. Then remove waste, comments, interruptions, bus factors, all of these things. Get it out, because the longer you in my experience, this is the most impactful thing to on speed for a code base is how distributed are the invariants, right? How easy is it to move here without being afraid? And then the final thing, reduce the cognitive.
Another team who, where a month or two ago, they had a bug that they chased for a long time, and it turned out to be an encoding problem. So this was still very much like on their mind, and so somehow it seemed this important thing still on their
actions of the website. So, for example, a team will own the product sections. We might have a team owning the cart, VIP, so many different squads, and I think that Sheen said that we have over 25 squads now at LEGO, so we really are following kind of the model.
Some good reasons to create microservices. Another person who speaks a lot about microservices is James Lewis, and he says that microservices architectures buy you options. And what does he mean by that? Well, it gives, and you start refactoring things from your legacy app to your modern app. In this case, it would be from your monolith to your microservices. You keep moving things over there. As you're moving them over, you use that. That's obviously very time consuming, very prone to error. So I always say as a prerequisite, if you haven't done CI/CD already as an automated process.
In a giant hall watching the keynote up on stage. And they put explosions and videos as part of the keynote. So that's a pretty extreme case of wouldn't it be cool if. Certainly normal Windows users absolutely would not. And it's a complete waste of development dollars. So that's an example of trying to be too cool, and very often one of the causes of that, if you have older HTML or you have something like Windows Forms or some of the Java toolkits from 15 years ago, you can't really do animation. So one of the things I see teams do is to go, when they go to animations, they just go crazy when it popped up on the alarm system. And by the time he figured out what it meant and they got to the place that it told them was a problem, the place was in the process of almost burning to the ground. Assuming design equals aesthetics. That's a pretty bad one there. But managers are particularly susceptible to that.
People that actually really want to hear my voice, everybody else does something else, right? And they have an asynchronous conversation with me. So in an asynchronous conversation, the receiver does not need to be present at the same time as the sender,
And so it's not enough for me to just say, we'll just extract all those pieces out into one class and have everything call it. I could have duplication that just basically stretches across all the different handlers of my system. So what I'd like...
But again, we just keep seeing it where folks don't go and trace where the data actually came from. They just assume, because everyone behaves in the organization like the mainframe or the legacy is a single source of truth, they don't really understand where the data is coming from. And on the article for this, we actually describe some patterns and techniques and workshops that you can do that can help you track down where data is really coming from. So again, this sounds really obvious, but we found it extremely useful and it seems to get missed quite often.
I'm going to talk about this other pattern now, transitional architecture.
Point. I even have a sticker on my laptop, so I'm that kind of guy. To start with the right question, what is the most important one?
Which is something to think about the next time you go for a run. Might be helping you adapt to change. What about machine learning? Do models need to forget in order to adapt to change? Here with reinforcement learning. So reinforcement learning is one type of machine learning. It's used a lot in gameplay and robotics. What they did in this case is they set up an environment where they had some obstacles and a reward. And the model needs to explore the environment, avoid the obstacles, and find the reward. And then, of course, they change it. And then the question is, how long does it take the model to adapt to that change and find the new location of the reward? And what they have seen is that if the model forgets faster, it adapts to change better. And it's interesting, it's especially true when the memory contains context, when it retains a relationship. You have to gather from the world and you have to assign the right answers to it. And again, depending on what you're doing, that can be hard and require humans to look at each of those examples and assign the right answers, which unfortunately is the case much too often.
But it's okay. I'll let you think that you might be right. So, but we are committed to this idea of multiple designs that compete with one another. So we'll do the grid-based design and let the users have a shot at that. At this point, he doesn't know what to do. Because I haven't said no, but I haven't said yes either. And a lot of managers at that level are kind of used to getting what they want by just stating and intimidating. Well, bottom line, at the end of the day, that app was considered extremely innovative and it's got no data grids in it. A temptation for many teams as they're getting started with this. Remember, in the developer community would rather be doing other things. So, there is a temptation to do things, I call that design field. So, we talked about one of those. Asking for feedback, but tipping off the user.
Well, they put it in their outbox, and Franz Kafka takes it over to the chef. The chef takes it out of his inbox, and the chef says, "Okay, I have some work to do. I need to figure out if we have the ingredients necessary to cook the order. I need to figure out if we have the capacity to cook the order. And if I do think we can do the order, what I then do is I put a message in my outbox to go to the driver booking team. And the driver booking team then get a message saying, can you book a driver for this order and when can you book it for? So the driver team phones up the restaurant owner's cousin Dave, and Dave says, well, the football finishes at 7:45, so I can probably start delivering orders about 8. So they then say, they put a message back to the chef saying, yes, we can deliver. We can start deliveries at 8, right? So the chef then knows I should start cooking for pickup at 8, depending on how long it takes me to cook this food. One of the biggest problems in my industry is delivering food hot, because you don't want cold food. So to do that, we have to essentially estimate how long it takes to deliver to you and how long it takes to cook, right? So the driver basically puts something back in their outbox, which goes back to the chef, and it also goes to the admin team, who then fax back basically ticket.
I'd argue building DSLs was the natural evolution of that kind of concept. So, at the core of this idea really resonated with me that software is the same as literature. Now, this was like a bit of a revelation for me when I was kind of a baby dev. Like it changes the way you start trying to use. That's why you feel that way. That's why you feel sad. So, you get to this certain point where you realize that all talk about design mostly dissolves into kind of discussions of dogma and absolutism. And it's because here's an absolute truth for you, ironically. Any design, when stretched to its logical, absolute extreme, becomes nonsense. Right? And I think, designing software with intention, software that survives.
Tak, więc to raczej bez powszechnej mobilizacji na Białorusi. Tu zaskoczenia by nie było żadnego, koncentracja takich sił z pewnością znacznie wcześniej by została dostrzeżona i byłby czas, żeby się na to przygotować, więc ja osobiście...
I w ogóle był taki do samego końca, dawał jeszcze sporo wykładów w ostatnich latach życia, można je gdzieś trochę obejrzeć w sieci, chociaż nie ma on takiej aż werwy, jeśli chodzi o mównicę jak Warren Buffett dzisiaj. Napisał sporo książek, są one oczywiście bestsellerami po angielsku, no ale nie za bardzo dużo treści znajdziecie w języku polskim, ale spokojnie, już moja w tym